So just a few minutes to go. So there'll be face-offs, and this starts straight away. So we now move immediately to the debate.
Bonsoir, mesdames, messieurs.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pierre Bruno. Welcome to 2014 debate. The four leaders will discuss the major issues. First, let me introduce the leaders. François Legault from the CAQ. Good evening. Mr. Philippe Couillard from the Quebec Liberal Party. Ms. Francoise David from Quebec Solidaire. Ms. Pauline Marois from the Parti Quebecois. Good evening. So the ground rules are as follows. 3 subjects will be debated in the following order. The first is social policy and governance. The second, economy and public finance. The third, identity and national issues. On each of the subjects, there'll be 6 face-offs of 4 minutes, and 4 minutes also in which everyone will be involved. All the face-offs and all the debating periods will begin with a question that I'll put to one of you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very good debate. So let's start with social policy and governance. The first face-off of Mr. Legault, Mr. Couillard. Let's talk about health first. That's still the priority of Quebecers. There are 3 former ministers of health on the set this evening. You've all promised to resolve the problem in emergency care. The average waiting period is still about 17 hours. What's the guarantee of results this time? Mr. Legault, you can start.
Dans le réseau de la santé.
There are major changes to be made to the health network. First, we have to negotiate with family doctors to make sure that we got a first line that'll be strong. So, family doctor available 7 days a week. And with home visits also, home care. Now, the major change that we want to make to the whole health system is to deal with the structures. In the health network at the moment, there are 46,000 people working there who don't actually provide services. What we're proposing is you get rid of health agencies. So I'd ask Mr. Couillard, therefore, why in 2003 do you want to abolish regional boards? In fact, what you did was change the names. And the 46,000 people don't provide services. How many will get rid of? Well, Mr. Legault, what we're proposing are clinics open 7 days a week for families, so without having to go to emergencies. They'll be able to do x-rays, as well as those which are already done in the private sector, such as scans, for example. And you can go there with your health card, and we'll increase the number of super nurses to help these people. That's what we have to do, therefore, to be accountable to citizens and to meet their needs. Now, as regards the structures, as you yourself said, you need agencies to coordinate certain factors. A lot was transferred to people on the front line. But you know, you said 46,000 people. Now, you have to check your figures there. A lot of people, in fact, who are considered as managers do, in fact, provide services. For example, a nurse who's in charge of infection control in hospital. She might be considered as not giving service, but she does give service. So it's not accurate to put everyone in the same bag.
Let me give you an example. In Laval, there's a health agency for 1 hospital. So that's like 3 floors, the health department, the agency, and the hospital. Don't you think that the health agency is doing double work? Is there too much? Don't you think that there's too many people in offices? There's many people in hospitals that have to file reports to these health agencies. So there's not a true decentralization, a true accountability for those working in hospitals. So I repeat my question once again. Why did you change your mind? In 2003, you wanted to abolish the regional health authorities. All you did is change their name. Why did you do that?
Well, let's be realistic. Let's be practical about this. We want to reduce red tape bureaucracy by 10% at every level of the health system in a way which it can be delivered. Well, the problem with your proposal is that if you want to reinvest in healthcare, that's what's going to finance the clinics. For example, MRIs. And that's how we'll finance MRIs. But with all due respect, really, you're kidding yourself when you think you save money with what you're suggesting. Because most of these people will stay in the health system. It's the same thing, in fact, for school boards. Really the same thing as for hospitals.
Mr. Couillard, I think you're speaking theoretically. Fine words, but let's be more concrete. If there's 46,000 people who aren't providing direct services, you say you want to take 10% away. Would you not agree with us that we should then remove 4,600 people from the offices of hospitals, of agencies, and the health department? And if you don't agree with the number of 4,600, what would be your number? Did you do your homework? How many people do you want to cut in the health system?
Well, it's 10%, but I'm thinking about families who need care in the evening, who, after they work, they have to go to the hospital with their child, or a senior who wants to be seen but not in the hospital. So we're not going to increase taxes. Rather, we're going to make savings. So that ends the first part. Let's go to Ms. Marois and Ms. David. Ms. David, your solution is to open the 275 CLSC 24 hours around the clock, 7 days a week. Doctors, well, you can find the doctors for this. Mr. Bruno, first I have to tell you there's a mistake. There are 140 CLSCs in Quebec, and that's what we intend to open. Not 24 hours, 74 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a lot of CLSC. Some will have to be chosen, for example, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'm not suggesting there should be doctors 24/7. At some point, there might be super nurses, practicing nurses who would have responsibility. For example, something very simple, to give the necessary drugs for a child who, for example, has a problem on a Saturday evening.
Madame Marois, yes, I don't think we have to redefine roles.
D'essayer de rehausser les services offerts dans les CLSC qui sont déjà débordés et qui offrent déjà des services d'aide, d'auxiliaires à domicile, de services.
They already offer home care with nurses for a few years, and it was under our government we envisaged setting up family medicine teams. It delivers results. The Liberals dropped this because they hadn't demanded of them that they would respect the commitment to offer services outside of the 9-to-5 framework. And what we need are multidisciplinary teams with social workers, etc.
Madame Marois, I think we have the same goal, but we completely disagree on the means. You're suggesting in the end to multiply the numbers of GMFs, the GP groups, and the multidisciplinary teams, but I'd like to remind you that this is exactly what the CLSC project was. I was involved with the creation of a CLSC in the 1970s, and I know that there were problems. I know that in the 80s, first of all, they weren't open at night or on the weekends. The state did not give them enough money for that. And what's more, there were some doctors who refused to go work in CLSCs because doctors preferred to be their own boss. And I think...
Madame David, I managed a CLSC in the Ottawa a few years ago. So I think we're coming with a model that is balanced. In our family medicine practices, we need clinical nurses, we need physiotherapists, dietitians, etc., in order for everyone to do a good job, help patients, and we need longer hours of business. CLSCs do prevention work. They take care of public health. They have mandates for home care as well. And I think it's complementarity that's the key word here. Why do we absolutely want to change the structures? What we have in place has to be improved upon.
Because, Madame Marois, you need this. I don't want to close the GMFs. Please understand, for all those that exist, we have to make sure they give services for which they need money because 40% don't do it. And I think that, of course, we have to continue with the GMFs that do exist, but precisely because CLSCs are already multidisciplinary, because we have offices, buildings, infrastructure, and infrastructure. There's 140 in Quebec, and so we don't need to go build any. Why not give back to this fabulous public service?
What I'm saying is that there's already complementarity. Why reinvent something that's there? We have to improve upon it, support it, and accompany what we have in place, the organizations that are there, be they CLSCs or family medicine practices. And we're proposing interesting things. We're proposing, for example, that there be a telephone service that would allow people to place a call like we have with Info Health. And the patient would be able to find out which CLSC is open, who could see them, etc. And I think that's a concrete measure to improve health care.
I will now have a free debate. I think it'll be interesting because I'd like us to talk about the aging population in Quebec, an important phenomenon that's occurring. 1 Quebecer out of 3 will have a cancer during his lifetime. Waiting lists for exams and for surgery are quite long. In addition, 1 Quebecer out of 5 does not have a family doctor. None of your solutions have given the hoped-for solutions.
What do you do, Madame Marois? Well, in our case, over the course of 18 months, let me underscore this, we've been in government for 18 months, there's been a reduction of 1 hour in waiting times in emergency. I'm not saying that it will be completely finished by the end of our mandate, but I believe that because we're working on the real issues, it will happen. We're talking about our aging population. We have to help the elderly stay at home, get health care, and that way they won't go to emergency.
Madame Marois, you say that you don't want to touch the structures. However, what we need is less people in their offices, more people in the doctor's offices in the hospitals providing direct service to the population. I'm going to ask the same question I asked Mr. Couillard. Let's take the example of Laval. In Laval, there's 1 local centre, 1 hospital, 1 agency, and the department. If we got rid of the local health authority and we put that money in direct services in the hospital, don't you think it would be a better idea?
Listen, he's asked me the question I can answer. We want to be more productive, but we don't have to turn all of the structures upside down.
Let's talk about what people are really concerned about. We'll talk about administration later. There's a big advantage that we have right now, and that's that we have more doctors coming out of our schools now because we increased training. And therefore, the problem with the number of doctors is being solved. What we now have to do is coordinate access to family doctors, and clinics are a structure that already exists and work very well. Family doctors, specialists to see people, radiology exams, etc. Now, you talked about the case of Laval. Interesting case, because I passed a law to eliminate 1 level. I agree with you that we can eliminate 1 level in Laval. 1 health institution, a specialized one, and the agency. Now, there is a provision in the law that allows Laval to pull everything together in a single organization. Madam David, can I answer?
Well, what you've done, in fact, was to... But now the CLSCs were the first wing. Now it's because they became non-existent. Now it's the hospital which takes over from everything.
What I'd like to say is that if we don't want to upset all of the structures, I'm proposing a situation and a solution that won't require changing the structures. Let's give the CLSCs the complete mandate to deliver all of the services while conserving the GMFs. That's not a problem. But it should be a public service funded by public monies, providing public service. I don't understand why we want to give the GMFs, and very often they're private, all of the public services. There's something that doesn't fit here.
We'll do that.
Mr. Bruno, in passing, there are 325,000 extra patients who have access to a medical doctor. It's not bad over the course of 18 months. Mr. Couillard wants to set up 50 super specialized clinics. What about the emergency wards? You want to remove doctors from there?
In faculties, in fact, you were the ones who shut them down. You were the ones who actually reduced the number of people going into faculty. We increased them. They're graduates now in Trois-Rivières-Chicoutimi.
You're wrong, and you know it full well, Mr. Couillard. As Minister of Education, I increased the spots for medical students when I was in charge of health. And those places are available. And your 50 clinics, where are you going to find doctors for them? In the hospitals?
Mr. Legault, please. Well, the most important thing we should be doing to provide everyone with a family doctor, and then 8,200 for 8 million people. Is that enough? But we have to change the payment system. At the moment, it's only 10% of the compensation, which goes actually to care. We should be increasing this to 50%. Now, obviously, the Union of Family Doctors doesn't agree. Mr. Balduc, who's Mr. Couillard's team, doesn't agree. Even if Mr. Barrett agrees. Just be very brief, please, Ms. David, to finish on this point.
Listen, I believe that there's something here that Mr. Legault is bringing up, and honestly, I must say that it's a good question, and it is part of the reasons why there was a time when doctors found that it was difficult to go to CLSCs. I believe that we have to come back to that idea of public service, that whole notion, and doctors, and I think it's the case of most of them, the great majority of them, that provide public service.
Sorry, the 4 minutes are over. Now we'll talk about integrity, ethics and transparency within the context of social policy. Integrity is crucial to the campaign given the illegal financing of parties. UPAC, the anti-corruption squad of the police, in fact, went to Parti Quebecois. Mr. Legault, you were a Parti Quebecois minister. Is this practice so rooted that it still exists today? When you look at political financing, and all political parties work together to reduce the maximum to $100. I think that's a good thing. This avoids us having groups giving $3,000, for example. We talked about integrity. I'd like to talk about political nominations. Ms. David, you saw the Liberals in office. There were 500 political appointments. Ms. Marois has appointed 50 people since she's been in office. Do you think it's inevitable? I think that we shouldn't actually be doing these political appointments. What we are suggesting is that all important positions should first be approved by a parliamentary committee. Would you agree with that?
Listen, there was a report that was tabled with the Quebec government relating to partisan appointments, and there was no follow-up to the report. And one of its recommendations, and we agree with it fully at Quebec Solidaire, was to charge an independent committee with appointing officials for large organizations, etc. I agree with you. There are too many partisan appointments. Much too many, and we need an independent process, after which everything can be on the table. An independent committee. Should it fall under the National Assembly for some positions? Should we say, let's go with 2/3 of the votes in the National Assembly? I'm ready to put everything on the table to avoid partisan appointments.
But have you noted, really, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other? Since the PQ has been there have been 500 partisan appointments. With the Parti Québécois in a year and a half, there have been 50. Why does it always have to be the same thing? Why is it always their chums, their pals? The Parti Québécois on partisan appointments is really not that different from the Liberal Party. The Parti Québécois, in fact, claims to be very, very pure, but why do they continue to have these partisan appointments?
I imagine because it's a deeply rooted culture. It's been in place for a long time. We could talk about the whole 20th century. Things work that way. Patronage, buddies, partisanship, and indeed, I believe that now we're in the 21st century and we have to try to view things differently. There will continue to be political debates and partisanship. Political debate is healthy for democracy. It's not a problem. There should even be more room for new parties in the National Assembly. But we have to stop with this partisanship in appointments.
So that concludes the first part. Mr. Couillard, Madame Marois, now you're both concerned by association on this issue of integrity. You with the Porter issue and you with the Blanchet FTQ issue, Ms. Marois. Mr. Couillard, apparently you invested money in tax havens. You refuse, Ms. Marois, to refuse your assets or your husband's assets. Are you really above reproach?
I do not accept that we compare the practices of the Parti Québécois to those of the Liberal Party. First of all, the Liberal Party was searched. A judge gave a search warrant. In our case, it was a request for a meeting officially organized with our party. Secondly, with regard to this famous investment in my husband's company with the Fonds de Solidarité of the FTQ, there was no deal, Mr. Bruno. You know this full well. There was no deal. Why? Because there is a commission that's investigating the construction industry. And if the FTQ had wanted to exert pressure on me, and it was said under oath, when I went there, I was faced with a wall. There were no deals. It was a concrete wall that faced me, and I don't like the fact that we're bringing this back to the fore.
Mr. Bruno, Ms. Marois, I'm against actually tarnishing people's reputation by association. And in this campaign, you've never heard me make that kind of accusation. I don't want this to be made by my colleagues either. But we have to say that certain things have happened. You yourself, the commission's underway, was created by the Liberal government, as well as the police squads. They're doing their job. There are meetings. I know there were meetings with your party, and they're just doing their job. We can't presume that people are guilty. Just let them do their job, and then we can see what the findings are. But you really disassociate yourself very quickly from these activities, whereas in fact you're not above reproach.
Mr. Couillard, there was a search warrant, and it was mandated by a judge, so we can question this, and $400,000 that we can't find in your coffers and in your books. So there's a bit of a problem there. You asked the UPAC to look into that. Go ahead, please.
Well, if I may, I'd like to answer, because there have been a lot of checks about this money. So this doesn't exist. There were no fundraising activities which could collect $400,000. Just not possible. We don't have any document to see what it's actually about. But really, you just have to accept this.
There was information that was circulated on this, but I'd like to come back to the matter of integrity, if you'll allow me, Mr. Bruno. On the Parti Quebecois site, I provided my tax report, my return for 2012, I had done it for 2011, and I also provide information with regard to some choices made by my husband. It's important to underscore this. I have no problem with transparency, but I want to say something. The Parti Quebecois, since we came to power, we have fought against corruption, and we've moved integrity forward. The first act that we passed was with regard to public contracts, and we asked for the commission.
Ms. Marois, you answered the earlier question about the Blanchet issue, but you didn't really answer on the Porter case. Well, I deal with this every day, Mr. Bruno. Really, I've dealt with this for a number of months every day. It's Mr. Porter, someone I know, but really to associate me with what he's being criticised about is totally unacceptable. There's no evidence at all of this. I wasn't even there when the contract went through. And I find this really very regrettable that you should make this kind of association. And I won't get involved in this kind of game. I could take each of these people and make gratuitous associations, but I won't do that. My programme for Quebec is not based on mud, it's based on an economic project.
It's not a matter of mud, it's a matter of integrity, Mr. Couillard, and I think it's important that the people who listen to us know how you're going to manage all those issues. You were responsible for two large organizations, the CUSM and the SHUM. And in the case of the CUSM, you were associated with Mr. Porter. You can't deny this. And this was a disaster. It was both CUSM and the SHUM were disaster.
You're showing the public that you have no scruples on this. You're making accusations by association with no justification at all, none whatsoever. In 2008, I left politics. The contract was given in 2010 for the CUSM.
You were not a partner with Mr. Porter? You were a partner with him. You know full well that you were, and there are some problems with him. I'd like to come back to this, to the whole issue of the overall issue of integrity.
I'm sorry, we have to move on. Now we'll have a discussion, all four of us. Ms. David, you have some things to say. Mr. Legault first. Mr. Couillard, there's an elephant in the room this evening when we're talking about your deal with Mr. Porter. You registered a company called Porter Couillard Associates, Inc. The company is registered June the 22nd, 2010 to the 4th of October, 2012, a 2-year period. I was in business myself. October the 4th, in fact, is the day after the scandal came out on the CUSM with the bribes to SNC Level M. Look, I was in business. And when you're in business and you register a company for 2 years, then you have to come up with the financial statements every year. So I'd like you, therefore, to produce them. And normally you have a business plan. What was your business plan? Please, if I may. Just a moment, please. I listened to your question. This company was never activated, and I've got evidence to show that. There never was a company. That's why there are no financial statements. This company never existed. And I can tell you, I'm very pleased it never existed. But you have a company for 2 years with Mr. Porter. You must, I guess, at least have a business plan. Where was your business plan? Well, we're talking about consultations on healthcare. Well, how could you be associated with the Director General of CUSM who's supposed to spend 100% of his time managing the CUSM? How could you agree to be in the same company for 2 years? There are financial statements there. Look, you know full well There was no company. Mr. Legault. Mr. David, please.
Mr. Couillard, I too have a question to ask. Perhaps it's the other elephant in the room, and it's the issue of Jersey. It's the $600,000 that you put in a tax haven. Now, I've listened to everything since yesterday, and I understand that it was not illegal. But sincerely, Mr. Couillard, really, everyone's preparing their taxes. Quebec taxpayers have to pay taxes on 100% of their income. Every year they pay their taxes. They have no other choice. Don't you find it morally unacceptable that someone such as you, someone who wants to be the premier of the province, well, you didn't tell us, but journalists told us, that for years, for a number of years, you have put sizable amounts of money in tax havens?
Ms. David, you said yourself that I followed all the legislation to the letter. All Quebecers and Canadians who are non-residents are not taxable in Canada. There's nothing new about this. Unless you want to change the tax legislation, this is the case. When I came back to the country, I disclosed these accounts, full tax was paid, and the divorce judgment that somebody found from the Sherbrooke court, it's actually in there. That's a tax system.
I don't want to focus too much on that. I want to focus on a big overall issue, that of integrity. And I am completely sick to see that Mr. Couillard, who may have to apply the reports of the Charbonneau Commission, there are 18 members of his team who were part of Mr. Charest's government, and they were steadfastly against the creation of a commission of inquiry in the province. Yes.
Well, that was in fact your subject for the debate. No, you asked me a question I have to answer. Ms. Marois, once again you're dealing with guilt by association. Now let me finish, please. We'll follow your logic. Because you were there at the time there was on report. In fact, you were involved in the report.
Well, you know that's false.
Well, you're doing the same thing to me. Why the standards which apply to you, don't you apply them to your opponents?
Because, Mr. Couillard, 18 members of your team were against the Charbonneau Commission. They did not want it to be created, and tomorrow morning you think that suddenly they have the credibility to apply the recommendations. I really don't support that.
Mrs. Marois, when you were in the opposition, you were against the partisan appointments of the Liberal Party. We'll get to that topic. Don't worry about it.
Mr. Couillard, I'd like to insist on this, and I don't say you're guilty by association. I'd like to talk about tax havens. I fully understand that what you did was legal. I don't debate. I don't believe it's the opposite. But my question for you is the following: is it truly a moral thing to do? For example, if you have a lot of money, it's not a problem. Couldn't you have simply put it in a caisse populaire in Quebec in order that it be useful for the community as a whole?
5 seconds, because we have to move on to the next topic. If you want to have things changed, put it in your electoral program. Well, that's it for that, and we'll now move to Mr. Legault and Madame Marois. In 2012, Madame Marois, the PQ promised to end partisan appointments. However, there were several under your government. For example, the former Minister Nicolas Giroir, André Boisclair, the leader of your party. Yes,
Yes, Mr. Bruno. There was 1,500 appointments under our government over the past 18 months. 40 of these appointments were people who are closely or a little bit more removed when it comes to the appointment. But there's reasons why we appointed these people. Of the 1,500, we appointed them because of their skill, their competence. And I think this must always be the criteria that we use when it comes to appointments. Mr. Legault, when he ran his campaign last time, he said he wanted to completely get rid of all the people who were at government, all in order to appoint people who would agree with him. Have you changed opinions, Francois?
What I said is that I wanted to have competent people, people who wanted to clean things up. Let me give you a very concrete example here. The Metropolitan Transportation Agency, when you arrived there, it was the former Director General of the Liberal Party who was in charge. And to double the price of things by wild spending. He knew nothing. You named Nicolas Girard, who had lost his seat as a member of the PQ. Nicolas Girard, well, he managed his county office, okay. but he had no other management experience. And you appoint him president of an organization that has 400 employees, billions of dollars of budget. What are the qualifications do you think he had? What were his qualifications?
Let's do things differently. What are the results of the AMT? He completely changed the budgetary situation of the transportation agency. He was surrounded by the best manager in such a way that he was able to get a good global overview of public transit. And this is what we needed. We needed someone who had vision, someone with perspective. And that's
How
what
can
we
you
did by
appoint
choosing him.
Nicolas Girard, who had never managed more than a single employee in his life, and ask him then to manage 400 employees? I'm going to ask you a question that I asked Madame David earlier. We propose that in the future, all important appointments, for example, the President of the Transportation Agency, move through parliamentary committee before all parties. Would you agree with that? Yes or no? Are you agree with it? Yes or no?
It's possible to modify the way that you appoint people, but I don't allow you to say that Mr. Girard did not properly manage the AMT, the transit agency. Mr. Legault, as long as he was able to do the strategic planning and control spending, and they were out of control, and he had good management, does it matter, Mr. Legault? Don't you think that so long as he's got the vision and he has this basic skill to manage people, that's what he had, and he did this very well with the AMT.
I'll ask my question again, Madame Marois.
Je suis prête à revoir.
I'm willing to review the ways of appointing people.
Let Mr. Legault answer. You say you're ready to do so. If we're in the government tomorrow morning, well, all important appointments will go through a parliamentary commission, okay? You say you're ready to have a look at it, but you didn't do it. You were there for 18 months. And you appointed 40 or 50 supporters. Friends first. It's the same as the Liberals.
I completely disagree with you. You're wrong. We appointed competent people who gave us results when it comes to the management of the services that we gave them, and that's how you have to assess the results today.
Madame Marois, 40 or 50, so you gave the number, friends of the party, political attaches, former members of Parliament. Mrs. Marois, you acted just like the Liberal Party did before. Friends first. Why do you think now, why do you do the same thing as the Liberals by appointing your friends? Your political attaches, your former members who lost their seats and that have no qualifications whatsoever.
It's completely unfair what you're saying, Mr. Legault, and you know it full well. The people that we appointed are people who are tremendously qualified and are skilled to fill these positions. What matters in the end are the results. And we introduced integrity into all of the actions that we took as a government, including with regards to this, because the people who were appointed, they organized the institutes, and you're giving us one case, my dear sir. You're giving
Nicolas Girard never managed a thing in his life. It was press attaché. It's not a press attaché that she should appoint as the president of an organization with 400 people. Completely nonsensical. It's just appointing friends, just like the Liberals. Well, that's it for this face-to-face, face-off, and we'll now have a free debate. It looks like the campaign is leading to low blows. Isn't that what makes people cynical? Doesn't that destroy the little confidence left that in Quebecers for their elected officials? Mr. Couillard, yes, I noticed that point, and I regret it. Every morning, I propose something to the population during this. I never started my campaign with insults to my adversaries or some words that won't be repeated here. I started my day with concrete propositional. No mudslinging. That's not my project for Quebec. To dirty others in order to be elected, that's not my idea.
Quebec Solidaire has publicly presented 10 or 15 proposals to the citizens of this province. Even yesterday, I said that when I go back to the National Assembly, I would like to put forward a bill that has to do with seniors and housing. Everyone thinks it's important for seniors to remain in their homes, but some of them are kicked out of their houses by developers that are just voracious. And I hope that this evening, the leaders of the three other political parties say that when we come back to the National Assembly, if we're all back there, that they will support this bill, because that's that's a way of showing concretely that really they're willing to work for the people. Well, if you would allow me, Ms. David, I completely agree, and this is a type of bill that's very important and needs to be debated and tabled. But I'd like to come back to the whole issue of good governance and good management. When we arrived in government, the first thing that we did was to adopt legislation on contracts in the public sector. Yes, but we also reviewed and rewrote the law on the funding of political parties so that people regain confidence in political parties.
Mr. Bruno, trust starts with delivering the goods. Madame Marois, in the last election campaign 18 months ago, promised three things. Abolish the health tax, freeze electrical rates, and the rate of the daycare, state daycare. Three promises, three lies. How do you expect people to trust politicians when we get this kind of lies, Madame Marois?
No. I don't admit that what you're saying involves lies. We took a commitment. We respected it. We reduced by half the health costs for 3 million Quebecers, for more than 1 million Quebecers.
This is the kind of conversation we shouldn't have in Quebec now, but I'd like to come back to the question of appointments. I think that it concerns the citizens that are listening to us tonight, and the exchange between Mr. Legault and Marois had truth on both sides. However, I would like to advise people about the excesses that might be present. Yes, indeed, we should increase the independence of the appointments of senior public servants. But this being said, Mr. Legault, when we talk about a parliamentary commission, I would advise against it. We see what goes on in the United States with these hearings. It ends up with witch hunting and all kinds of other things, who spoke to who and who saw who. And this does not help democracy or the management of the public service. A balanced approach, competency, transparency, and sometimes an independent mechanism for a certain position. But a parliamentary commission, I think we should be careful about that.
Honestly, while we're talking about all of this, it seems to me that people at home are expecting concrete proposals from us, proposals that will seriously improve their life. Madame Marois supported my proposal earlier, but Mr. Couillard, Monsieur Legault, if we end up in the National Assembly together, will you support my bill? I mean, will I be able to produce something here in this room?
Yes, I'll answer that. We made a proposal for retired persons listening to it to have stable retirement, and the value of their houses increased, but taxes increased. Yes, we'll get to that shortly. We'll talk about that under another theme. Mr. Legault, what I understand about what Mr. Marois and Madame Marois, Mr. Couillard and Madame Marois said, neither agree with the fact that all appointments, all important appointments, go through a parliamentary commission, an independent parliamentary commission. Well, I have a question for you, Mr. Couillard. 36 of your candidates, your current candidates, voted 11 times against holding a public commission of inquiry. Do you support these 36 candidates? Do you think it's a good idea? You said that Jean Charest had waited too long. Answer, Mr. Couillard. What's important, Mr. Legault? What I said is that the commission should have been started earlier. It was set up. It's sitting. The anti-corruption squad is working. The Charbonneau Commission is working. We will apply its recommendations. So people were just lacking courage for a few weeks. That's what you're saying. No, careful to associate people with that. The knife can cut both ways. We'll now have a free debate on the question of governance. This is fine. Everybody is following my lead. Now, public finances is also a concern. The first face-to-face on that will be Mr. Couillard against Madame Marois. The creation of jobs. So we won't start a war of numbers on jobs, but the current trend is that a lot of good jobs, good, well-paying jobs, are being replaced by part-time jobs or so-called McJobs. Now, how are you going to go about creating good, well-paid, permanent jobs? Mr. Couillard, over to you. Mr. Bruno, we made a commitment to the population to favor the creation of jobs. It's business to create employment, not the state itself. So 250,000 jobs over the next 5 years is our goal. By accelerating infrastructure investment, to credit for the renewal, for renovation of housing, the Northern Plan, the maritime strategy in Quebec, and particularly helping small and medium-sized businesses have 50% of employment in Quebec. This is less than 200 employees. Help them export, innovate, and hand over to the next generation. For example, I met businessman in a B2B who exports pipes for drilling. He has 65 employees, drilling pipes. Now, his pipes are, for example, in Zambia. When I said that we would have an export credit of 50% to the destination, he understood that he could increase his sales, hire people, and increase his business. This is a concrete example of the kind of thing that we will do in the very first few weeks of our mandate.
Thank you very much. You're right. We have a plan to consolidate and develop jobs in Quebec. We did not wait for the end of our 18-month mandate before presenting our plan. It's a four-part plan. The first part has to do with the electrification of public transit. It's a plan to increase the number of companies that will export outside of Quebec. We believe we can increase by 1,000 the number of companies that export. A plan for research and innovation. This will allow us to put Quebec's talents to the creation of jobs. And I have an extraordinary economic team that I will set up as well.
Mr. Couillard, over the last year, it's the public sector that's been creating employment, while in Ontario it's the opposite. Jobs are created by the private sector, in particular in small and medium-sized businesses. We have a different economic profile in Quebec because of the predominance of small and medium-sized businesses. That's why we announced all these particular measures for small and medium-sized business, for them to launch easier, for them to export easier, to innovate better, and transmit to the next generation. You're right, Mr. Bruno. It's not normal that the rate of creation be in the public sector and that it not be in the private sector. This is very disturbing for the economy.
If you'll allow me, when the Liberal Party was in power, 150,000 jobs were lost in the manufacturing sector. Since we've come to power, there's been an increase in the number of jobs in the manufacturing sector, and we've already put in place a policy to support our SMEs to help them become more productive. Our exports have started to rise again under the Parti Quebecois government.
Mr. Bruno, the number that Madame Marois quoted, that starts in 2000. Take a look at your notes. Now, in addition to that, we went through the most important financial crisis of the last 10 years, and it's up to the manufacturing sector to innovate. So we should favor the return of manufacturing and have new sectors in the new economy. Thank you very much. Now, there it is. We're already through with this. 4 minutes. Now, I will go over to Madame David and Mr. Legault. Madame David, with your green plan, you would like us to do without the most petroleum possible. It would require a lot of investment, and you want to tax big business more. You want to increase the mining royalties. Or don't you think you're killing the hen, thinking that we can still get the eggs?
No, because our hen is quite large. I'm not going to swamp you with numbers, but the National Bank in Quebec, its profit was $1.5 billion in 2013, so things are going quite well. And you know that the capital of banks, the assets of banks, to use concrete terms, are only taxed at 50%, whereas a salaried worker in Quebec pays taxes on 100% of his or her income. So at Quebec Solidaire, we're saying that we should tax more consistently banks' revenues. It won't kill the hen that laid the golden egg. The banks are thriving thanks to us, thanks to all of us who invest our assets with them.
Mrs. David?
What do you think of that, Mr. David?
I think these taxes are already increased. We answered the question. I would like to come back, generally speaking, to the economy in general, to ask you a question, Madame David. I think that currently the major problem that we're facing when we look at the low economic growth is the question of household consumption. Families don't have money to spend. That's why we propose, we at the CAQ, to clean up government, clean up taxes to businesses, even if that might not be convenient for large businesses, but also to abolish the health tax and school taxes. The health tax that Madame Marois was supposed to abolish, it was implemented by the Liberals, it starts applying as soon as you make $18,000. Now, $18,000 is not a huge fortune. And the school tax isn't just. Think of older people. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll get back to that when we talk about the economy. Right now, we're talking about job creation, your Saint-Laurent project. Are people interested in it? Well, I think that if we wish to help businesses. Currently, businesses, when they pay for their labor costs, they don't have the same labor costs as the United States because their employees pay higher taxes. It's not another topic. I still think that the best way to relaunch the economy is to reduce taxes in order to improve consumption. I would like to know, Mr. Couillard doesn't agree here, to reduce taxes over the next 4 years. He only wants to do it in 5 years. Madame Marois has nothing to say about that. So what do you think about it? Well, thank you for asking the question.
I'm happy that you're asking the question. We're asking that we create 185,000 jobs, 60,000 jobs in public transit. I stated something recently that people didn't understand. It happens. The distribution of wealth creates wealth. When you redistribute, when people have more money, a little bit more money in their pockets, instead of having $620 per month in social assistance, if they have a minimum income level, what does it do? It helps them. They spend their money here, not like people who call upon tax havens. These are people who pay taxes. If we have salaried workers who earn more than the minimum salary, these are people who encourage economic activity. And I'm dealing with our issue, the issue at hand, with regard to tariffs and taxes, etc. You know full well, Mr. Legault, that we don't agree with the increase in the rates of Hydro-Quebec. We're not in favor of an increase for child care. We're not in favor of any increases in taxes for a family with 2 adults and 2 children. We're going to put $2,000 more in their pockets.
School taxes. We have elders in Quebec that bought their house quite some time ago. It was worth a lot less. Now it has increased in value, and they can't pay the amount of tax being required now. It's a real estate tax. It's a value-based tax. Don't you think that the school tax is unjust? Mrs. Marois increased it by 20-30% last year. Don't you think we should abolish it? I think we're getting a little bit out of our theme. Excuse me, Madame Marois, you won't have time for reply, but it's now the free-for-all, and maybe you'll be able to get back to that point. But first of all, we're talking about job creation here. Job creation. This is the theme of this segment. In the last year, there's been hardly any major investment creating jobs in Quebec. Now, why is there not more private investment in Quebec? Does the government always need to intervene and do something to encourage the creation of jobs? Mr. Legault. Well, I talked about a project last October, the Saint Laurent project, where I created how we can create quality jobs in Quebec, in particular in looking at tax credits for research and development, multimedia, e-commerce, etc. So I filed a plan. I had a real plan then. Now I have a question for Mr. Couillard. Let's look at the 9 Liberal years. We were in the 6th rank of the provinces. Now we're in the 9th position for wealth. There's only Prince Edward Island that's poorer than us. I'd like to know what is different in your program from what you had in Jean Charest's program. You took one of my chapters on the maritime strategy, but outside of that, I'd just like to know what's different. Wrong debate. I'd like Mr. Couillard to speak about what about whether government needs to intervene. I'll give an example. I answered Mr. Legault. No, I don't have to criticize your Saint Laurent plan to talk about my maritime strategy. I think it's a very interesting project. It's based on free trade and increase in importations and exports that go through Saint Laurent. We have to capture that, build infrastructure, train up labor, develop a blue economy, a number of interesting measures. But just like you had in your project, you had some interesting measures, and we both have some. You should recognize it. Now, for example, repairing port infrastructure, training labor, encourage the role of state. The role of the state is to create environment, not to create the jobs themselves. Naval construction, you talked about that yourself. There's 8 shipyards in Quebec. So we would like to allow a shipbuilder to keep some of his taxes in order to renovate if it's done in Quebec. So I can tell you that the maritime people are waiting for us to be elected in order to move forward. That's how a government can create employment. Mrs. David, over to you.
Listen, what strikes me is that we're always talking about the same jobs. We want to squabble. between the public's intervention and government intervention. Should intervention just be the affair of private business? Yes, private companies create jobs, and we could perhaps stop giving them all sorts of gifts, and I'm talking here mostly about the large companies. But yes, there's a link between jobs and government action, even if it's just through education. With regard to your Plan Nord, Mr. Couillard, it's Mr. Charest's plan, and it's also Madame Marois' plan. The Plan Nord is this extraordinary exploitation of the north with mining, etc., and the government is going to spend a lot for infrastructure, ports, roads, etc. Even if we open up mines in the north, there are all sorts of young people who leave high school, who don't finish their studies at CEGEP. They go there and they earn $80,000, $100,000 a year, and when the mine shuts down, they have nothing.
I guess you don't like the Northern Plan because they're not just mines there. There's social life, a social component. There's energy also. There's also a reserved area. 50% of the area is reserved. So,
with regard to Plan Nord, you're very aware of the fact that the government that preceded us, your government, indeed didn't take care of the northern communities the way it should have. And it paid for infrastructure for companies instead of asking them to contribute. And the Mining Act and the Mining Royalties Act were such that half of these mining companies didn't pay. We changed the rules, and we're going to continue with our strategy for job creation to support companies for research, innovation, productivity. I didn't get very much time.
I've been all across Quebec. I've talked to contractors, business people, not just in the north, in Beauce, Gaspésie, Mauricie. They told me about the day when you killed the Northern Plan, when they had to lay off people. You didn't get out and meet people. You didn't talk to business people. You didn't go out on the ground. In fact, you didn't go and see people.
Mr. Couillard is exaggerating, and he knows this full well, because we did support the development of Plan Nord.
Now let's go to the next issue, taxes. Mr. Legault, Mr. Couillard, you both want to reduce the size of the public sector to meet your promises. You talked about the abolition of school boards. How many people are actually going to lose their jobs? Do you have a figure? Well, there are 4,500 people in school boards. We want to reduce that to 2,500, but we'll do it through attrition. Some people, in fact, will be sent to schools to teach. Others will go to other administrative services. But to choose between administration of school boards and services to pupils, to students, I prefer to give service to students. When I met people from the regions, this is a major fear about your project. In the regions, there are small rural schools. They're afraid they'll lose their school boards. They're frontline, these school boards, for them. Everyone knows that your proposal is not realistic because you have to deal with school transport, specialists in education, and you need an organization for that. You want to set up consultant organizations. It'll just be more and more public servants. You won't achieve the goals. You always start off with good ideas, but they're not valid. You talk about sorting things out, but in fact, you're just plundering it. What do you mean by plundering? We're talking about families who are stifled by taxes. They have to use their credit cards. Let me ask you a question about school boards, a clear question. 7% of people, in fact, voted in the school board elections. Do you want to keep the school trustees? I know there are a lot of them in the Liberal Party convention. It's a very powerful lobby for you. Why $1 million being used for school board elections to pay for school trustees? Why don't you put all that money, those millions, to help the children in difficulty? Why are you choosing the lobbies rather than the children? You know the lobby I listen to? It's the lobby of parents and the regions. That's the only lobby I listen to. The parents know that the school boards provide services. You're right that the turnout rate for the elections for the school boards is not very high, but you should be encouraging people to vote by linking the school board elections to municipal elections. Let me finish, please. For example, I've got children of school age. Soon, I hope I'll have grandchildren. I knew who my school trustee was. I knew who he was. And that's important for me as a parent, particularly in the regions, it's important. 7% of people actually vote in the school board elections. Are you going to still keep acting when they're at 2%? Will you do something then at least? When are you going to get rid of the school boards and school board elections and school trustees? The parents don't want the school board elections. I've never heard that. For example, I've been to the regions a lot more than you. And the people there, they don't want school board elections. They don't want them anymore. What they want is services for their children. Parents want services, you're right, but they don't want to lose what they have. You don't know that because you haven't spoken to the people in the regions. I was in Les Îles de la Madeleine recently. People are very concerned by the merging of school boards. They don't want to lose their school board. This is a major issue for them because of the schools. But this indicates, for example, I'm from Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. The presence of the government on the territory is important. Look, the people watching us this evening, surely they know that these millions of dollars shouldn't go to school boards and school board trustees. Rather, they should be used to provide services to children who have learning difficulties. The waiting list for those children who have learning difficulties is enormous. It's not acceptable. The situation at the moment, Mr. Couillard, is this. There's a bureaucracy which is far too heavy. No, it doesn't make sense. You can't have specialists in every school. You say you create up an organization. They'll be even more bureaucratic than the others. Thank you very much to both of you. Our next face-to-face is Ms. David and Ms. Marois. You said you want to give it a health tax. Leave the daycare service at $7. Make public transit free of charge. Hire 15,000 teachers. How much is that going to cost? Do you have a figure? And where are you going to find the money?
Yes, we have a number, and all of that, the plan that we've tabled, our fiscal framework is for 5 years. So let's be clear. With regard to free transit, we even gave ourselves a 10-year horizon. But one thing is clear, and I hope that everyone here knows this. The Opus card, the monthly card in Montreal, costs $80. Yes, the tariffs, the rates are increasing. For electricity, there's going to be a new increase because Madame Marois' government is allowing this increase to come, and it'll be 20% more in the next 4 years. All of these rates for daycare, etc., will also increase if we elect the PQ on April 7th. They'll increase by 28% over 2 years' time. When we say that families are struggling and that they're stifled, yes, they're stifled by all of this. Your numbers? Well, our number, forgive me, we're adding $13 billion to the coffers of the state, and we'll have $13 billion in extra expenditures. Madame Marois, what Madame David has said is very interesting, and we'd all like to do that, really. It's a dream. But we can't realize this dream, and that's the problem. We can't increase Quebecers' indebtedness, the debts of our children and grandchildren. My hope is that we won't increase tariffs and taxes, but we'll index them. And when you talk about daycare, I'm very proud of our daycare network. We have to maintain its quality, I believe. And I prefer to tell Quebecers that, yes, we had to increase the rates to preserve the quality in order to continue developing the network. And I think that is being frank and honest with Quebecers. Mr. Couillard is proposing that we increase Quebec's debt by 15 extra billion. That's always been the Liberals' recipe, increase tariffs and taxes. We want to index all of these rates and tariffs. We believe this is reasonable. We want to be more effective in the public service, in social services, in school boards, and this is how we will maintain a balance, helping citizens and also reduce our debt, because that's an objective that I have, and I will deliver. Madame Marois, there's something that isn't working here. You're not indexing daycare services, you're increasing them. I didn't say that. I said no. And secondly, the electricity rates aren't going to be indexed as of April 1st. They'll increase by some percentage points. We'll have to wait and see what the decision is. It seems the decision's been made. Thirdly, we're proposing solutions to put money back into the state's coffers. So we're not dreaming here. We know that money doesn't grow on trees, doesn't fall from the sky. I talked about fully taxing the revenues of financial institutions. Why don't you do that? Well, we did increase taxes on banks, and we increased the taxes that mining companies pay. Through royalties, they'll pay their fair share. And if they earn more, this will increase because it's a progressive tax. So I believe that we've made efforts in this area. But it's so little. But we want to increase jobs, and if we increase jobs, we'll increase the number of people who will contribute through their taxes to the state, and in this way, they will help us to create wealth and also to develop services like you want to do. I want to create jobs, yes, with investments in public transit. That's the future of Quebec. I agree with you.
2 years ago, the gross debt was $183 million. Now it's $197 million. This is an enormous amount. Can we still afford all our social programs? And if you had to abolish one program, which one would you cut?
Which one? I don't cut social programs. I'd like to remind you that they were cut quite a lot over the past 15 years. And I'd also like to remind the people that are listening to us that there's one thing that brings together the leaders of the three other political parties around this table, is that they're all saying, either in their budgets or part of their financial frameworks, that over the next few years they will make cuts of about $1.3 or $1.4 billion. So I prefer to find money for the state.
Well, I think you have to make a distinction here. You're talking about social programs. This comes from job creation, but you're also talking about debt, and the debt is high. We've got a very high debt burden. But a large part of this debt, well, we have to add to it. Ms. Marois suggests increasing the debt for infrastructure reasons, to repair the roads, the hospitals. We won't stop needing that. But what we need is a plan to control the level of the debt in the economy, which will lead us to achieve our objectives. When I listen to Mr. Couillard, it seems that we can spend whatever we want on capital expenditures. We can announce whatever we want, 450 million, for example, for cement works. The two parties there. During the 9 years of the Liberals, they increased the debt by 60 billion. That's 7 billion a year. Ms. Marois increased it by 8 billion in 1 year. It's even worse. Mr. Couillard now says he's going to spend another 11 billion a year for capital expenditures, even more than the PQ. So he's going to increase the debt even more than the PQ. Well, let's just think about our children, please.
Mr. Bruno, first of all, we had to fix all the problems left to us by the Liberal government, and that was before we had to deal with planning and investments in our own public services. Our roads, our schools, look at our schools. They have a problem with mold, and we need to invest in this. We've set a limit to control the increase in our debt. Mr. Couillard says, no, don't, you're not doing enough. Add $15 billion to the debt. And that's exactly Mr. Charest's recipe. The debt servicing has already cost us $8 billion, and now they want us to increase it more. You don't have any additional solutions, Mr. Legault. You just talked about we need to increase the number of jobs to increase state revenue. There's one thing that I would like to add, is you can't take on that type of attitude with regards to our debt. Other countries have worse debts than we do. Sure, we have a debt, 49% of the province's GDP. Obviously, we don't want to go on a spending spree, but when it comes to investing in public transit, I think that's very important. It creates jobs. While we're talking about this huge debt, like some sort of scarecrow out there, I'd like to remind you of the other debt. That's the one of Quebec families who can't afford to be in debt on a day-to-day basis.
And they also have to pay for the federal debt and the provincial debt also. What is it, 11 cents on the dollar for interest? Look, this is a very important issue. As regard infrastructure, roads, ports, hospitals, schools, this is part of our economic growth. You need good infrastructure to have a growing economy. Now, we have a specific plan, a financial framework. We'll start, modestly in the beginning, we'll start to record surpluses. We know that 50% of the surplus will go to the debt. 50% will go to reducing taxes.
But Mr. Couillard, your tax framework is not realistic. Economists have said that to you, Mr. Couillard, and you think you're going to come up with surpluses?
Well, we'll talk about this with Mr. Legault, Madame Marois. You promised zero deficit next year, Ms. Marois. This year for you, Mr. Legault. Zero deficit without increasing taxes? Is that what you're saying? How are you going to do that? It has to hurt somewhere.
Mr. Bruno, we're going to do it by properly managing the state's finances. In 1 year, we have done what the Liberal Party was never able to do in 9 years. We controlled the spending growth, and we did not give up when it comes to the economy because we decided to invest in supporting job creation.
Well, essentially, there are two solutions. First, you had to reduce the number of people in offices. There are 220,000 people out of 560,000 employees in Quebec. 220,000 don't provide a direct service. This is a great opportunity now because the baby boomers will be retiring. So on a voluntary basis, don't replace those people. This will help us to reduce the number by 25,000. And you have to put the money then into the services. Second solution, second approach, you have to have the courage to face up to big business, multimedia, electronic trade. We can't just continually give on giving $20,000 in subsidies every year to foreign companies from multimedia, who are in fact competing with small and medium business in Quebec.
Monsieur Legault, you seem to think you have a magic wand. You think you're going to make cuts here, cut school boards here. Once again, you're focused on structures, Mr. Legault. That's all it is. In fact, we have one of the best industrial setups in the world when it comes to multimedia. We're one of the 3 or 4 capitals of the world that are focused on special effects. I think we should be there to support it. Now, there are limits in time to this support, but I think we need to continue to support them. You keep talking about structures, but what I suggest that, sure, we need to streamline. Yes, we need to be efficient, but we need to work on the whole issue of employment, regional development, forestry, and food security.
Last summer, in the middle of the crisis on Lac Mégantic, your Minister of Finance introduced an extension of 5 years for multimedia tax credits. We're talking here about big business, foreign companies. People in multimedia, they can find a job quite easily. All the companies are looking for multimedia engineers. Why are you giving them $20,000 a year in tax credits for life?
Mr. Legault, I really don't think you understand the economy and where we are in the world. Everywhere in the world, there are companies that are attracted by tax credits, whether it be in cities or regions. We acted with intelligence, and we targeted quality jobs that are well paid. We supported a creative industry, and I think we did well.
The only person who created a business among the 4 of us is me. I created real jobs with Transat, Air Transat. I'm a business person. I'm passionate about the economy. For me, it's full-time, not part-time like you. If I'm in your position tomorrow morning, then I will create jobs. I will attract private investment. And I won't be doing that part-time. I'll be doing it full-time, not like what you're doing.
That's exactly what we did. I went to Davos, to London, to New York, and I attracted here.
You haven't created one full-time job since you've been there.
I attracted people here. IFCO, I have a great team because I don't think there's one single person that can make the difference. I have 8 people on my team that have created, and I'm sure we'll be able to create more jobs together.
There were 3,242,000 full-time workers. It's the same number today. You didn't create one single job. And in fact, they created 110,000 in Ontario. Are you proud of that? How could you be proud of that?
You have no idea what you're talking about.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the face-off now between Mr. Couillard and Madame David. Most Quebecers are not able to contribute to pension plans. These people want us to deal with this question as quickly as possible. The deficit in the pension plans. What would you do to address this problem? Well, we'll legislate on this once we come into office. We've talked about it to the mayors of Quebec and the mayor of Montreal. Well, we have to have a sharing 50-50 of the assets and the liabilities of the plan. We have to begin negotiations on every plan, on every level. Often it's the women who survive after the death of their husbands. We would suggest, for example, rather than the Labour Relations Commission, arbitration of 6 months with very clear benchmarks as regards the ability to pay people, the survival of the system, and also, of course, perennity survival factors.
It's important to note that there's a number of cities which over many years have refused to pay their contributions to retirement funds, and employees continued to pay them. I'm not saying the employees don't have a good retirement fund, but I do think that, yes, negotiations are important, a real negotiation, not just a negotiation where you're being threatened, and if you can't come to some agreement, someone else is going to take the decision for you. Ultimately, all these retirement funds were at one point negotiated and accepted by the two parties, that is to say the unions and the municipalities. I think it is up to them to resolve this issue.
But you know that there were negotiations where there were agreements. For example, the city of Saguenay. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. We can't allow this to go on forever. The rules are clear. Arbitration with benchmarks. If, for example, a mayor reserves the right to index pensions, then he has to put the savings back into the city and not tax the taxpayers even more heavily, because this is transmitted in forms of taxes. The people of Montreal, if you don't deal with the pension plan as a Quebec City, then it goes into their tax account. We want the situation to be dealt with without taxpayers having to carry the burden, because most people can't afford and not able to have access to pension plans.
Well, then, what we need to think about is how we're going to ensure that all people in Quebec have access to retirement funds, have access to a dignified retirement. It is not actually the case. You're right. The majority of people do not have private negotiated retirement funds. What? They have the Canada Pension Plan or the OAS. Canadian seniors are getting poorer. And if you have seniors in a large city like Montreal, the biggest problem has to do with speculating on property and property taxes.
I'd like to come back to that because I have a proposal that could be discussed but that I couldn't spell out earlier. Mr. Legault referred earlier to couples that have a stable income and that the value of the house goes up and therefore their taxes go up. We propose to have a government guarantee so that a financial institution each year pay the taxes, city taxes and school taxes, that will be paid back to the bank when they sell their house. This will allow elder couples to remain in their house longer. 40% of retired couples leave their house for that specific reason. So that's a very concrete proposal. I hope you will support it. We'll include in the discussion the two other leaders because this is a concern for all of us. Population is aging. How can we ensure that each Quebecer will have a decent retirement?
I'd like to come back to the exchange between Mr. Couillard and Ms. David. We tabled a bill that would allow us to resolve the whole issue of retirement funds, in particular in municipalities and universities, because there are a number of funds which are affected, and we believe in a negotiated settlement. At the end of the negotiation, there must be arbitration. We don't believe that it's relevant or important to allow one person take the decision. There must be benchmarks, and that's why we're proposing a labor relations board.
Mr. Legault wanted to add a point on the retirement. In cities, the employees who are union, part of the FTQ union, have the retirement fund. And there's a $5 billion deficit. There's only two people who can pay for it, the taxpayer or the employees themselves. The coalition, my party, is the only party that's going to give the power to the mayors after 1 year's worth of negotiation to impose the conditions concerning this. Well, of course, Madame Marois is against this, but Mr. Couillard is also against it. He wants to name an arbitrator or something, but Mr. Bruno, people who have the opportunity to have such a wonderful pension fund, they're the ones that are going to have to pay for the deficit in it. We shouldn't impose upon the citizenry people who, generally speaking, don't have one, the cost of the deficits of the people who have a good one in cities. Would you like to add something to that? Yes, we're almost on the same wavelength on this point because you're mixing the working conditions and pension plans. I'm talking only here of retirement plans of municipalities. We believe that arbitration after a year is a good solution, better than the Labour Board.
Mr. Legault, I mean, you must understand how much I disagree with you. It's almost like you're saying that unionized employees who've bargained in good faith, and often in the past, it's like suddenly they're supposed to give up something that they expected through when they did good faith bargaining, just because they work for the municipality. That's not fair. It's true that taxpayers have all sorts of problems. There are problems with taxes, with rates, but I think we can deal with that in other means as opposed to the means you're proposing tonight.
Madame David, don't you think that mayors elected, accountable, that want to be re-elected in 4 years, don't you think they should have the power to do this? Do you know what happened in the past, Mrs. David? We named arbitrators, committees, etc., and every time the municipality that had the best work conditions served as a model. Today, municipal employees earn 30% more than the same jobs in the Quebec government itself. That's what arbitration leads to. Mrs. Marois.
Mr. Legault knows full well that the goal is to come to some agreement that will allow us to protect the rights of taxpayers, protect the rights of workers and municipal authorities. What we're suggesting is that we continue with the bargaining from the past, but for the future, we have the 50-50 sharing, and that we apply rules that ensure that workers pay their part, that municipalities pay their part, and when the fund has to be improved, then everyone covers the cost for all people, because I agree there is a problem, and we need to assess the possibility of reviewing certain aspects of the retirement fund so that all people have access to it.
That's it for this segment. The theme of economy and public finance. The time it moves on. It is 16 minutes after 9 now. Identity and the national issue. The first face-to-face will be Madame David and Mr. Legault. Madame David, you are a sovereigntist and you wish that there be a referendum in your first mandate. Were you elected? You're dreaming of Quebec that would rapidly be independent. Are you pulling the rug out from under Mrs. Marois' position and would refuse to commit on that issue?
I fully claim who I am. My ideas have not changed. I'm a sovereigntist. My party is a sovereigntist party, so I don't see why we'd fully assume our option. We are talking about our country. We talk about it with passion. We've talked about the type of country we are, what we want, and if we're elected on the 7th of April as a government, what we want to do is to create a constituting assembly elected by the people. And the mandate would be to hold a large debate, a large consultation with the people on this Constitution project, followed by a referendum on the Constitution and on the future of Quebec.
Mr. Legault, I think that currently you haven't been listening to the population, you and Madame Marois. 70% of Quebecers and even more don't want a referendum. They think that the time is not ripe. On the other hand, there are Quebecers who think that it is the time to do something about defending our identity. So I'll talk about the values charter. Now, Mr. Couillard, we know he doesn't want anything. We'll be talking about that on another thing. But this is the most important point here. So we have to defend our language. We have to defend our values. We have to be able to defend our identity, but without, in the short term, separating from Canada. People don't want a referendum in the next few years. What they want is to be able to say, yes, I want to live in French, and Mr. Couillard doesn't seem to support that.
Well, that everywhere in the workplace, to work and live in French, absolutely. I'm a great defender of that position. But Mr. Legault, I have a question back at you. Now, not that many years ago, you yourself were a sovereigntist. You were a very eager sovereigntist. So I really don't understand what you are now today. You're sort of a sovereigntist, but you don't dare to say it. Or are you a federalist, but you're kind of embarrassed about it? What are you, Mr. Legault?
I'm a nationalist. I think that we should put Quebec first in all of our decisions. We have to get Quebec back on the rails. Quebec is in a bad situation right now. Things are not going well. We received $9.3 billion of funds from the rest of Canada because we're poorer than them, equalization payments. We have an economy that's not working, no matter what Madame Marois says. We have the most important debt of all provinces. Do we want to clean our own house first, and the next generation can ask this question? But for now, 70% of the population don't want a referendum.
So, Mr. Legault, what you're saying is that so long as we clean up a bunch of things, really, you're a sovereigntist.
I'm a nationalist. We have two choices. Either renegotiate the federation so that we could honorably sign the Constitution, or sovereignty. And in both cases, it is advantageous for us to work so that Quebec be healthy from an economic viewpoint. It's not the time. Quebecers don't want to talk about that.
But if we talk to them about it, because the problem is that really, other than us, no one's talking about it. Maybe when you're sovereigntist, you have to dare talk about it. Talk about your country, dream about your country. And I think it is a great dream. It's a great project. And I think it will allow Quebec to move forward.
Thank you. That's it for that theme. But we'll now carry on with Mr. Couillard and Madame Marois. And we'll talk a bit about the referendum. Madame Marois, you're a little bit ambivalent about whether there'll be a referendum or not. Mr. Couillard, you talk about the Constitution with the rest of Canada. Have you not made of this election a referendum election? Mr. Bruno, that is the theme of the election with the economy. But as Mr. Legault said, and I agree with him on that, I talk to people just don't want anything to do with the referendum. Not only that, but they don't even want to discuss the issue raised by the Parti Quebecois. And I think we should say to people that Article 1 of the Parti Quebecois Constitution is for the independence of Quebec. And sometimes you just have to be who you're supposed to be, as Mrs. Said. Now, Mr. Péladeau entered in the scene very spectacularly by saying that he wants the referendum. All the other candidates said the same thing, and now we see that people don't like it. So in 1994, we'll just put it aside. That's what's going to happen. No, there'll be a referendum with the BQ.
Mr. Couillard, integrity, employment, social policy. These are issues you're bringing up to change the subject. And I'm going to tell you straight off this evening, there won't be a referendum as long as Quebecers aren't ready.
There it is.
Madame David would want one no matter what. Do you think we'll hold a referendum? No, Mr. Couillard. Don't laugh. It's a very serious question. You tried to change the subject. The election is about a government. Who do we want in Quebec City? The old Liberal team or a team with the Parti Québécois to move Quebec forward based on Quebecers' expectations?
No, Madame Marois. Mr. Couillard, answer. People know that you're going to hold a referendum. They saw you in 1994, and we were saying exactly the same thing, and 1 year later we had a referendum. Okay, not the first year, maybe in 4 years? Fine. All your candidates are saying that these days. So stop telling to Quebecers you don't want to hold a referendum. You're going to rush to a referendum. When the people who have a job want better health and education, they don't even want, when they're ready, to hear talking about it. Because you're going to create a fight in order to it. What they want is not a referendum, but jobs.
Yes, I too agree that they want jobs, Quebecers, but they also want to have a Quebec that stands up. And from the beginning, you've been changing your opinion every second day. One day you want to sign on to the Constitution, the next day you're no longer sure. I know that Quebecers must stand up and must defend their interests. And I'm not convinced that in that regard you have been clear enough and made that clear commitment. Furthermore, I'll repeat this, these elections are about jobs, the Charter, our language, culture, our identity, not a referendum, and you know it.
No, Madame Marois, I do not give you the right, nor the legitimacy to decide who's a good Quebecer or a less good Quebecer, who is more or less proud to be a Quebecer. I'm as proud to be a Quebecer as you are. I believe that the future of Quebec is better assured in the Canadian Federation. What I condemn is not the fact that you are not as sovereigntist as Mrs. David, but that you don't have the honesty to say to the population that you're going to trick them into a referendum as soon as you're in government. And you know darn well that's what you're going to do.
You know full well, Mr. Couillard, that I'm a determined woman, but I'm also a woman who is able to listen to Quebecers. And right now, what Quebecers need is a government that has integrity, that will take care of jobs, take care of our children in our schools, who will take care of managing public affairs properly. And it's on that that the election is going to bear. You want to change the subject, to change the channel.
Mrs. Marois, you just said, I just heard you. We all heard you. You said that there won't be a referendum, 3 points, unless Quebecers want one. And you will bring the fence about to ensure that. Huh? Do they want one now? The story of your party is the referendum trap every time you're in government. You did it in 1994. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madame Marois and Mr. Couillard. We'll bring the other two in a general free-for-all. Madame Marois, you say there won't be a referendum until Quebecers are ready for one. How will we know that Quebecers are ready? How? When?
At present, and we've been discussing this for some time now, we're saying that Quebecers aren't ready, that they don't want to hear talk about this. Madame David is saying even if they weren't ready, I'd put the question to them. Does someone think that because we want to be a country, if Quebecers aren't ready to give themselves one, we're going to ask them the question? Listen, let's be serious. That's reality, Mr. Bruno. Madame Marois, but that's my question that I have with regard to you. I have no doubts about your being a sovereigntist, but contrary to Mr. Couillard, I really don't have the impression that you want to hold a referendum. He seems to be convinced, but that's not at all my impression. And in fact, my problem is that you're not talking about the country. You're not making Quebecers dream about their country, and that's how they'll be ready. It's if we talk to them about it. It's not the referendum I'm interested in, you're right. It's the project of a country, not the referendum. Well, then talk about it. Let's discuss it. It's a means to get there.
I know the PQ quite well. I was a member of it. I saw Pierre Caledo with his fist in the air, we want a country. Well, maybe not you, but there's people around you that want it to be the priority. And you can't seem to commit not to have a referendum because there's too many people around you who want one and who are in a rush to hold it. And I think that you're not listening to the population. The population doesn't want a referendum. Sincerely, you should change your slogan. Instead of being determined, it should have been disconnected. People don't want a referendum, Mrs. Marois.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. They don't want it, and they won't have it right now. That's not the issue.
Mr. Bruno, the people who are listening to me want a good job, worthwhile, and the finances that allow us to support health and education. Unfortunately, Mrs. Marois' option weakens Quebec and its economy. It's time to stop talking about this. Every time we say we don't want one when we really do, and it just keeps on going. It's time to stop. People express themselves clearly on it. There will be no referendum. We'll talk about the economy and jobs.
I disagree completely with Mr. Couillard. I think that the problem, at least it's my impression, is the following. If the PQ is elected on April 7th, there won't be a referendum, and there won't be any consultation. There won't be a project to build a country in the next 4 years. That is my concern.
I hear Mr. Couillard say that he doesn't want a referendum, but sometimes when he's speaking in the evening, all you're talking about is the referendum. Everything you've been doing since the beginning of the campaign is to scare people. And now the surveys are going your way because you're using the good old technique of scaring people off. You're not proposing anything new in economics, in the economy, anything new compared to Jean Charest, nothing new for government services. Mr. Couillard, answer that. All you want to do is scare people. Thank you. I congratulate you for listening to my speeches. Please continue. They're getting better and better. Now, each time I speak to party activists, I present, and to the population, I present the choice, and which is a clear choice. Do you want a government that's going to prepare a referendum? You say that you think that Mr. Marois will do that. Or do you want a government that will take care of the economy, jobs, education, and health? And I don't agree. Mr. Bruno, may I finish, please? Well, contrary to what you say, Mr. Legault, we did put forward concrete proposals every day. Go to our website. I invite people to go there. Every day there's new proposals. We have a worked-out financial framework. Last word.
Do you want a government that will stand up and defend the interests of Quebec, or a government that reduced its power base, like Mr. Couillard did?
On aborde maintenant entre...
All over now. Mr. Legault and Mr. Legault will start off discussing the Charter. Mr. Legault, you're in favor of several of the elements of the Charter put forward by the Parti Quebecois. A recent survey says that the majority of Quebecers, 50 to 55%, have a negative opinion about Muslims, Jews, and others. It could not be a perverse effect of the debate that was held on the Charter. Well,
Quand on parle de langue, on parle d'identité.
when we talk about the Charter and identity, let's talk about, like you say, the real issues. You really hesitate when it's a question of defending the French language and Quebec identity. Let me finish, please. You say, we know that in Montreal, French is in decline. You're just negating the problem. Mr. Bourassa, who was the leader of the Liberal Party long before you, in order to defend French, he used the opting out clause. You would never have had the courage of doing that. You do not wish to defend our identity. And I'm going to ask you a question once again this evening, because I haven't received an answer yet about the Charter. Can a policeman in Quebec, a police officer, male or female, could they, yes or no, wear a religious symbol? Can you answer clearly on that issue? I'll answer all your questions. You're putting 8 issues in the same questions. You're a businessman, and a businessman takes care of existing problems. There is no cop wearing a religious symbol in Quebec right now. It's not true that we don't want to pass laws on this issue. We believe that accommodation should be controlled. We believe that people shouldn't be covered. We believe that our religious heritage should be protected and the equality between men and women and the neutrality of the state. Of course. But there's other things that you have to talk about. For me, it's completely absurd to deny the Quebec identity and the strength of our identity, which exists, by firing women, often vulnerable women, that working in hospitals, in schools, and in daycare. It's absurd. If you think that, then you have a very low opinion of our Quebec identity. I think it's much stronger than that. Mr. Couillard?
Mr. Couillard, if you want to divide Quebecers, then... Well, the problem is that this evening there's a majority of Quebecers who think that a police officer, a figure in authority, should not be able to wear symbols, religious symbols, because that person should be neutral, impartial. But you can't defend Quebec values. You just can't do it. You can't support the majority of Quebecers who want to defend the values. Really, you are hesitant. Mr. Legault, you're almost insulting yourself when you doubt that a Quebec has the same views as you. That is, we have to defend Quebec identity. And when you're associating the identity of Quebec, the fact that really police officers should wear or shouldn't wear a police officer. Look, the fact is there's a regulation on uniforms. Let me finish, please. There are rules which are set up, and so things are done properly. Rules are set up by the police chiefs. Look, stop trying to create problems that don't exist. Look, if a Liberal Party comes into office, then there won't be any prohibition for people wearing religious symbols. Would you confirm that, yes or no? So you really don't want the Charter values. Quebecers have to know this. That's not true. Would you agree with a police officer wearing, for example, a veil? Yes or no? That's my question. Look, it seems quite clear to... Could a female police officer wear a veil, yes or no? No, look, let's deal with the real question. This will be managed directly, as is the case with every city around the world. Let's stop there. We won't have discrimination. Let's stop there, please. Ms. Marois, Ms. David. Ms. Marois. Is your government responsible for all the divisions created by the Charter? As we know, it's difficult to find a consensus. The Commission Taylor-Bouchard said there is no crisis.
The divisions are due to the fact that the former government was incapable of making decisions. It tabled 2 or 3 bills. It never went through with them. And contrary to what the Bouchard-Taylor report says, there's another report, a very detailed, in-depth report from the status of women. And this report says that we have to clarify the rules so that we can live together comfortably with equality between men and women. And their recommendation is exactly what we're proposing in our secular charter. And Mr. Couillard, I can tell you that on that, when I listen to you, you are doing things piecemeal and you're not solving the problem. You want to fire some of these women.
Mr. Couillard, this between Ms. David and Mr. Marois.
Let's talk about Maria Morani for a minute. Listen, Madame Marois, status of women. It would have wanted to have tabled its recent brief before Parliament, but elections were called and we didn't have the opportunity to see the report. But you know full well that in that report, it is proposed that only people working in schools and in daycares, only those people would be prohibited from wearing religious symbols. So we're not dealing with the same issue here. When you were in this studio in 2012 during the previous election campaign, in a face-to-face with Jean Charest, you told Mr. Charest, a premier mustn't divide Quebecers. And Madame Marois, I've seen over the course of the last 8 years that your Charter of Values that has become a Charter for Secular Values, etc., it brought about deep divisions, cleavages within Quebec society, and I don't know how you're going to patch the pieces back together. Listen, not only do we not want to divide Quebecers, we want to rally them around common values with clear rules in order to live together peacefully, in harmony. There'll be state neutrality, and no one is going to be fired, Mr. Couillard, rest assured. However, we want to ensure that the rules are clear and that we give ourselves enough time to make a good transition. And the bill, the Charter project, already provides for transition periods before it comes into force. So let's not get all upset. And this will allow everyone to know what the values are, what shared values we have, and that the state will be neutral. But of course the state must be neutral. Of course, that's logical. But you know as well as I do that that doesn't mean that automatically state government employees won't be wearing religious symbols. In Germany, in Belgium, there are public servants who wear religious symbols. It doesn't make the state less neutral. The fact that the debate turned around this sole issue has brought about a lot of division in our society. I don't agree. Our charter proposal clarifies these issues, contrary to what the Liberal Party did. It didn't clarify anything. We define what the rules will be, and we believe it's important that the state be neutral in that area.
So now a free debate on this. It seems a majority of Quebecers want a charter of secular values, according to the polls. What are you actually proposing in a charter? Mr. Couillard. Well, once again, I have to say, some people say we don't want to legislate on this. That's not true. There are a lot of points on this. If the government acted responsibly, we could have reached an agreement, and then we would have a charter which has been implemented. For example, everyone agrees that we need benchmarks, for example, for requests for accommodation. For example, there has to be reciprocal behaviour by the person who wants accommodation. Everyone agrees that faces should not be covered. Everyone wants gender equality. Everyone knows the state of Quebec is a religiously neutral state. It's just not true to say that's not true. But we also know that our religious heritage has to be preserved. If we put this in legislation, we would have avoided a lot of social divisions caused by the government.
What I would like to ask Mr. Couillard is this. I read Madame Fatima Ouda Pépin's project, and sincerely, I have no problem with 95% of it. All of the part about the fight against fundamentalism, etc. I don't understand why you are not able to accept that bill, which would most probably rally the great majority of Quebecers. First of all,
well, you've raised a very interesting point. That is the fight against fundamentalism. We don't have an enormous problem of fundamentalism in Quebec. Let's be realistic. The points that you mentioned, we agree. This came from the committee which Mr. Ouimet chaired, and this will be in the legislation. But the charter from the PQ will in fact exacerbate fundamentalism. Madame Pépin decided to leave the caucus. She wasn't expelled. We did everything we could to keep her. And it's hard to keep people. Ms. Moranis, you're right, she was expelled. There's some fundamental factors here. Just briefly, if I may, in answer to your question, you raised the point earlier that the fact of being religiously neutral for the state doesn't mean that we should practice discrimination against certain people. You said that. There are a lot of international examples that show that. This one of the points The disagreement was the fact that Ms. Pépin left, she wasn't expelled. Well, Mr. Couillard doesn't want to prohibit religious signs for anybody, regardless of what Quebecers want. So what's the position of the coalition? I'll explain to you now. Those people who are figures of authority should not be able to wear religious signs. This includes judges, police officers, prison guards, teachers also, because teachers who spend all day with children, for the children, these are models, and they shouldn't, in fact, wear a religious sign. Same thing applies also to school principals. If Ms. Marois, in fact, had acted in good faith, then we could have reached an agreement on a charter of secular values.
You must always presume of one's good faith. We are carrying out consultation. One thing is clear. Our viewpoint is clear. No ostensible religious symbols in public services in the government. And if we had to choose the Liberal Party, well, there wouldn't be a charter in Quebec, and yours, to my mind, would be betrayed. It's important to us that the rules be clear in Quebec, and that's what we're proposing to Quebecers. Mr. Bruno. There will be a charter.
So we'll continue with the language then. Mr. Couillard, your party was against legislation to strengthen Bill 101. Does that mean for you that French is sufficiently protected? Look, we'll always have to work hard, not just to protect, but also to promote French in Quebec. That's why we are so different, because we're francophones in North America. But Bill 101, which we adopted a long time ago, which has been amended since then, it reached a level of balance and social coexistence with 1 million Quebecers who have English as their language, their mother tongue. So we really have a balance which is satisfactory. We also live in a global village now. A lot happens in English, and we can't think you can just remove English. But a lot of people, including Mr. Prévost, a candidate from Madame Marois, are against imposing an extra burden, a language burden on businesses. Rather, it's better to help them to move French forward.
Mr. Couillard, I still think that you don't quite understand how much English is taking over in the workplace, in particular in Montreal and the Outaouais. I was part of the Parliamentary Commission on Bill 14, and I found that your representatives systematically caused obstruction, and it showed that they weren't interested in the survival of French. Here's a simple question, Mr. Couillard. Do you know there's large hotels where the bosses want to insist that the cooks, who have nothing to do with clients, they must speak English. They won't be hired if they don't speak English in the kitchen.
Not at all. I don't agree with that at all. Bill 101 has to be fully implemented. But I've been across Quebec, but even in small businesses, people have to be able to speak to the clients who speak in English. Even in Lac Saint-Jean, people really have to be bilingual. So this exists. I'll go further. We have to teach French effectively. You have to be able to speak it well and write it well. But you also have to be able to give every Quebec child the chance to be bilingual. And that's why we're proposing strengthening the program for teaching English in grade 6. Of course, we have to learn to speak our language well, but we live in a world where the knowledge of another language is indispensable.
Mr. Couillard, if in 10 years our kids have to learn Mandarin because the Empire of China will dominate, no problem. But what I really want is that in Quebec, you be served in French everywhere, including in downtown Montreal. I want companies and client relations in Quebec be done in French, except in some neighborhoods where obviously 90% of the people are Anglophones. I mean, you can't behave in an unintelligent fashion, but I think you need to understand that that's not the situation. The situation is that immigrants have to speak French, but the first thing they learn when they try to find a job is that they're asked if they speak English. We're in a crazy situation where immigrant support organizations are offering French classes and they should be teaching English.
Bilingualism is not a threat. It's an incredible asset for people.
But just to work, Mr. Couillard.
Well, it depends on the job. There are more and more jobs what's important. For example, even in a factory, it's in factory floor, it's important. If you visited factories I have, you'd know it's important.
Why? Why do workers have to, who are working in a factory, have to speak English?
No, they don't. They speak French. For example, if a client wants to export something to the United States, then this client comes to the shop floor. He wants to talk to the workers, the foreman. How do you make this? What's the problem here? And then people talk French, of course. But their knowledge of English is indispensable. Okay, this concludes our part of the debate. Mr. Legault, Madame Marois, is French in danger in Montreal? Oh, yes, it'll always be in danger. It's regrettable that the Parti Quebecois introduced legislation to improve Bill 101. The Liberal Party, in fact, refused to discuss this. They wouldn't even discuss it. You'd agree with me on that? This doesn't make any sense at all. I've never seen a Liberal leader so little concerned about French in small businesses. Ms. David is right. There is a problem in some small businesses. Without it being necessary, people are forced to speak English. And we have to change that without adding to red tape. And we tried to negotiate this with Ms. Marois. Ms. Marois broke the negotiations because, as with the Charter, what she wanted was not to have an agreement with the CAQ. What she wanted was to keep that for the elections. All she thought about was electioneering.
Mr. Bruno, when we're talking about legislation where we could have compromises that would provide good results, we did it. This is what we did with mines. You remember that, Mr. Legault. But for language, there was a limit under which I didn't think we should go. And I think that is why we stopped our conversations with you. I'm fed up, Mr. Bruno. I'm fed up with hearing Mr. Couillard this evening say that there are no problems with the French language in Quebec. French language is going through very difficult times right now. Francoise David had described situations to you that are real, and I'm very pleased to hear these situations. I find it a disaster to think that he thinks that one day he could lead Quebec and defend our language. He doesn't even understand the issues that we're dealing with in our factories, in our companies, and in our neighborhoods. So, Francois, you agree?
I agree with you. It's incredible to hear Mr. Couillard this evening. He refuses to defend French. He denies there's a problem in Montreal. That's incredible. This is unprecedented from a Liberal leader. But Ms. Roy, you said earlier, you said you don't want to drop below a certain threshold or a certain level. You said the same thing about the Charter. Now, the Charter that we proposed was supported by Jacques Parizeau, Gilles Duceppe, and Lucien Bouchard. So to say they're going to prohibit religious signs being worn by people in authority, are you saying, in fact, that Jacques Parizeau is soft on this? Is that what you're saying?
The charter that we proposed to Quebecers is supported by the vast majority of Quebecers. So I'm fine if one of them sees things differently from what we put forward, but we believe our charter is solid and it meets the needs and deals with the realities that we're faced with. I think we need to correct things through this charter.
If there's a Liberal government, then we don't want that, of course, but if this does happen, you can be sure of one thing. You'll have missed an opportunity to reach an agreement with Mr. David and myself to adopt a charter of secular values. Do it quickly, and you tried to stretch us out as long as possible for election purposes. It just is unacceptable what you did. In fact, you stretched this out, you dragged it out for 8 months. Whereas this subject is explosive, it's very sensitive.
You know that the Liberal Party was desperately against it. We couldn't even start discussing it. You want to go too low, and it wasn't acceptable.
Jacques Parizeau, Gilles Duceppe, and Lucien Bouchard, do you think I went too long?
Mr. Legault, I'm talking to you about language, and when it comes to language, we couldn't accept the compromises that you put forward. That's it. So you can say whatever you want.
Do you really think that Jacques Parizeau, Lucien Bouchard, Gilles Duceppe would have gone along with this? It had been too low, and if it hadn't defended Quebec identity, Quebec values? Let's just stop there. It's just electioneering what you were doing. You didn't want a solution. Thank you, Ms. Marois. Thank you, everyone.
Quelle pourrait être cette charte?
So what could this charter be? How could we reach a consensus? Because Quebecers have shown, through the polls, which have been conducted in recent months, that in fact people are interested in a charter of secular values. 57–60% of the people want that, depending on the polls. Now, together this evening, if you had to draft such a charter, on what could you reach a consensus to bring everyone together? Well, we know what the consensus is based on. The points that I mentioned earlier. I don't think Quebecers want people really to have nurses or teachers dismissed, fired. And I asked the other day, how many women will be dismissed? How many nurses will be dismissed? So she wouldn't answer it. And for me and for a number of Quebecers, it's not acceptable. Of course, we have to assert state neutrality. We have to set out benchmarks for accommodations. We don't want covered faces in the public service. It's common sense. And Mr. Dranville said we weren't talking about the Charter. We know it's an important issue, but Quebecers want jobs and they want health care.
I'd just like to add the concept of secularism in this charter. I think it's a good thing, and I would also add that people who are in a position of power, such as prison guards, judges, police officers, should not wear any overt sign of faith or religion. And I think if we stop there, I think 90% of Quebecers at least would say that this isn't so bad, because it's fairly tough to get that type of consensus. The whole issue of religious symbols, let's just put it on ice. It's divisive. It's destroying us. And I think it will give rise to certain signs of xenophobia at certain times. Ms. David, you know full well that it's this whole issue of ostentatious religious symbols has caused problems. And we've had problems in those situations. But I think we need to focus on my plan. No, I mean, it's just ridiculous. There's nothing to do with religious symbols.
We should ask all Quebecers to come to a compromise. Here we have people at both extremes. Madame Marois wants to forbid these signs for all employees and Mr. Couillard to nobody. What we propose is to say we forbid ostentatious religious symbols to peoples in authority, judges, police officers, teachers, prison directors, school directors. This is in the private sector. It wouldn't be. It's not compulsory. Where schools are compulsory, but you want a person working in office that has a small cross and is not a person in authority, that they not have the right to wear it. Mr. Creel, it's just a cross. One moment, please, Mr. Marois. Mr. Legault also, Mr. Bruno. The government of the Parti, directed by Madame Marois, has acted in a very irresponsible fashion. We artificially created a crisis that did not exist. It was created, and women are now being verbally attacked in the streets since this project was put forward by the Parti Quebecois. Earlier, we're talking about economy, data, deficits, jobs, numbers, etc. But there is no numbers, no study that justifies what Madame Marois is trying to do. And that's why. You're saying there's no problem. One moment, Madame David. Everything.
Sorry, everything's all confused here. Sure, some things have slid, but it was exaggerated by media that we won't name here. That was 2007, 2008, and it had to do with accommodation. It did not have to do with religious symbols. So, sure, we could say there was a bit of a crisis. Let's call it that. There was the Bouchard-Taylor Commission, the report with many recommendations. But over the past 8 months, the crisis has nothing to do with accommodation. We all agree that we have to solve that. It has to do with religious symbols.
Sorry, everybody, that's it. And that is the end of our face-to-faces. But I now give each of you 1.5 minutes to speak directly to voters. Mr. Legault, you're first. Thank you. This evening, I am calling upon your power as citizens. I'm asking you to turn your back to the old parties, the Parti Québécois and the Liberal Party. The Parti Québécois is the party that is obsessed with a referendum. Voting for the Parti Québécois is to vote for a party that's disconnected from reality. This evening, I would also like to speak directly to those who wish to vote Liberal because they don't want a referendum. What I say to them is, remember, the Liberal Party is the worn-out party that we threw out only 18 months ago. The Liberal Party is the one that brought us the level of debt we have. It's the one that brought us to the position where we're the most indebted government in North America. Voting Liberal isn't blocking the Parti Quebecois. It's blocking all of Quebec's future. This evening, I make 3 commitments. Number 1, I will fight to clean up the situation and reduce taxes. Second, I will relaunch Quebec's economy. 3, I want a real Charter of Quebec values. We are unique people. We are a nation that is strong. Everywhere throughout the planet, our creativity is applauded. There's only one thing missing for Quebec to go further, a government in our image, an honest and courageous government. On the 7th of April, choose a party that will bring Quebec forward. Choose a party that will work for you. Vote for the Coalition for the Future of Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Couillard. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a project for Quebec. I want to lead a government that will take care of your priorities. You expressed them quite clearly as I went throughout the province. It's the economy, employment, education, and health, and the good management of your taxes. It's not the division brought about by a 3rd referendum. My government will relaunch the economy and create jobs. We will accelerate road repair, reduce taxes for the renovation of houses, and help our small and medium business create jobs. We will support the development of our regions by launching the Northern Plan, having a maritime strategy, and supporting the agriculture and forest sectors. We'll reduce bureaucracy and invest in services. We will fight against problems in schools. In health, you may have to wait months for a scan, but you'll be able to go to a clinic with your health card. We will open 50 of these super clinics, open 7 days in 7, and you will have an alternative to emergency rooms. As Prime Minister, surrounded by the best team, I will direct a government that you can be proud of, a government that's honest and competent, a government that will gather all Quebecers under its wing, because what unites us is more important than what divides us. I want to be the Prime Minister of all Quebecers, no matter what your political allegiance. I invite you to join together with me so that we can deal with the real issues together. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. After a week of accusations, swear words, and this new national sport, I tend to put all politicians in the same basket. But I ask you to not do this. I'd ask you to come and vote on the 7th of April. Vote with your head, vote with your heart, because change is possible. I share your disappointment, given the PQ government, which did not fulfill its promises. The solution is to not vote for the Liberals. They haven't changed at all. And don't vote for the CAQ because it's some sort of Siamese twin of the Liberals. The real alternative, the real new political party is Quebec Solidaire. We talk about people. We talk about you, your life, your jobs. We're not afraid to deal and face up to the big lobbyists of the world. Over the next few days, the old parties are going to be playing on your emotions, and they're going to try to bribe you. They're going to say, listen, vote like you always do. Vote simply because you're resigned, because there's nothing else to do. And on the 7th of April, I ask you to put an end to that, to step out of this vicious circle, and to vote with your head and your heart, and vote based on your deepest convictions. And I ask you to vote for Quebec Solidaire. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Bruno.
Ms. Marois. Thank you very much, Mr. Bruno. You've known me for a long time. I began under the government of René Lévesque. I led the Parti Québécois. I've dealt with problems. I've managed to make my way through it. I fought against corruption. I've been a premier for 18 months. And you know that when times are tough, you can count on me. I've brought together men and women who share a vision, who represent the future of Quebec. And with this extraordinary team, we will adopt a charter of secularism, which is exactly what you want. We'll create jobs for the future, protect our environment, ensure that Quebec is a world leader when it comes to the electrification of public transit. We will gain wealth through our natural resources, such as oil in Anticosti Island, and we'll do it in a responsible manner. We'll put an end to suffering through our plan, Dying with Dignity. We'll take care of our children, our families, our seniors, and we'll stand tall, defending our interests, our values, our culture, our language. That is a government. That is the Parti Quebecois government. Without that, we'll go back to the Liberal years with the same old people, the same old ideas, and that would be terrible for Quebec. But if you vote for us, you'll have a government based on integrity, a plan for the future. You must trust the Parti Québécois. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Marois, and each of you. This is the end of our 2014 debate. I'd like to thank our 5 leaders who were with us. Mr. Legault, thank you very much. Mr. Couillard also. Congratulations, Mr. Broom, Mrs. David, and you, Madame Marois, also. I would like to thank all the leaders because this evening you participated in a democratic exercise that is quite difficult but necessary. It is now up to you, electors at home, to make your decision on the 7th of April. Thank you for your attention. Have a good evening and go out and vote.
Bonsoir, mesdames, messieurs.